Welcome to the Campus Energy and Sustainability Podcast. In each episode, we'll talk with leading campus professionals, thought leaders, engineers, and innovators addressing the unique challenges and opportunities facing higher ed and corporate campuses. Our discussions will range from energy conservation and efficiency to planning and finance, from building science to social science, from energy systems to food systems. We hope you're ready to learn, share, and ultimately accelerate your institution toward solutions. I'm your host, Dave Karlsgodt. I'm a principal at Fovea, an energy, carbon, and business planning firm.
Scientists talk about collaboration when it comes to research itself, but to have them talk about collaboration when it comes to the tools to support research would be a huge win.
We want people who want to be sustainable, who want to help their organization purchase smarter, be able to do so. Right? So we want to empower, in fact, our mission statement is empowering professionals to save money and save the environment.
In this episode, you'll hear my interview with Julie Cahillane, Sustainability Associate Director at Northwestern University, and Dr. Garry Cooper, Adjunct Professor at Northwestern's Fineberg School of Medicine, and CEO co-founder of Rheaply Incorporated. In our conversation, you'll hear how Garry has leveraged his experience working in research laboratories to start up a company that is helping institutions better manage their laboratory surplus supplies and underutilized equipment. Julie will discuss how Northwestern University is piloting Rheaply's platform as part of their broader sustainability efforts to reduce waste and increase reuse in their laboratories. On an editorial note, my intent with this conversation, as well as all of our podcast episodes, is to do a deep dive into a particular sustainability topic. I'm not intending to explicitly promote or endorse a particular company, but I also recognize that many cutting-edge ideas do exist in the private sector. In this particular case, I felt like Garry and his company Rheaply have developed a novel approach to addressing some of the challenges at the intersection of waste and scientific research. I think you'll find this conversation clearly fits within the exploratory intent of the show. But I would welcome your feedback, especially as we consider interviewing other for-profit companies in future episodes. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy this January 31st, 2019 interview with Garry Cooper and Julie Cahillane. Julie and Garry, it's great to have you on the show today.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, Julie, let's start with you. Can you give us a quick background on who you are and a bit about your work at Northwestern?
Sure. My name is Julie Cahillane, and I am the Associate Director for Sustainability at Northwestern University. My work at Northwestern centers on engaging our campus community in practices and behaviors that align with our campus strategic sustainability plan. And much of my work focuses on resource conservation, waste reduction, recycling.
Great. Well, Garry, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the innovative work you're doing at Rheaply, but can you just give us a little background on who you are as well, and then we'll dive into Rheaply here in a second.
Yeah, so I'm Garry Cooper. I'm from Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, if anyone knows that place. I did my undergraduate at Indiana University in Bloomington, BS in math, BA in chemistry, and then I came to Northwestern in 2008 and completed my PhD in neuroscience in 2014. A postdoc thereafter, and now I'm an adjunct faculty member in the Fineberg School of Medicine, as well as CEO and co-founder of Rheaply.
Great. Well, let's start there. Maybe you can just give us a little pitch, or elevator pitch of what Rheaply does and what we have to look forward to learning more about today.
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple. Rheaply tries to help large organizations answer a singular question. Do we already have this? As an organization gets big, it's very hard for people to know if their colleagues might have resources that they could leverage, as well as it's hard for a large organization to understand resources that can be redeployed as opposed to going into a landfill. So Rheaply tries to solve that problem through just better asset management.
All right. So if I understand it correctly, you're talking about things like equipment and chemicals, but not assets in the general sense of like a big organization. Is this mostly lab focused?
That's how it started. We started, I'm a scientist, so we kind of started in the lab. I was fortunate to work in a lab that was very well funded, but I had a lot of friends and colleagues who were in labs that were struggling from a financial perspective. So we started kind of just a research sharing program. So it started about lab equipment and supplies, but now with clients ranging from universities to Fortune 500 companies to Fortune 10 companies, there's a lot of, we kind of have an array of things on our platform now.
Great. Well, Julie, so coming back to higher ed, since it's the focus of our podcast here, maybe you can give us a little bit of your perspective on, I know you've done a pilot with Rheaply, and I know you deal with these issues generally. Like, what are the problems that institutions are facing around managing assets, maybe particularly in a lab or in general?
Yeah, sure. So Garry hits on a lot of the words. The very first conversation I ever had with Garry, I was excited about Rheaply because he really got it. He understood the excess and surplus and waste issue from a laboratory setting, and in our conversation, really grasped the kind of resource conservation perspective of reducing waste to the landfill, which can also help save cost. So resource conservation is one of the 5 program areas covered in our strategic sustainability plan. And we've identified as an institution that we really need to reduce waste generation through our comprehensive review of both our procurement practices and our reuse practices, whether they exist or not. So expanding reuse programs like what Rheaply is trying to do to extend the life cycle of our products within our campus is definitely in line with that. It'll support our efforts to reduce waste and to decrease cost. We also need mechanisms to track progress in the areas. The 2 R's, reduce and reuse, are much harder to measure than recycle. And so historically that's been a challenge, and Rheaply is kind of bringing that potential both to the measurement and to the ability to potentially implement a surplus operation.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Julie. And Garry, maybe you can back up into how you got to start Rheaply. I mean, how does one go from studying neuroscience to start up in this area? What's the story there?
A question my mother always asks me as well. So the high level story is during my research in the medical school at Northwestern, me and a couple others started just internal reuse program, which was really just amongst the people on our floor. And what we would do is we would take things that we no longer needed in our lab, put on this cart, and I would essentially every week kind of just run the cart around the floor and say, hey, does anyone need X or Y or whatever we would have on the cart? And that started to pick up where it wasn't just the people on our floor who were interested. It would be people on floors above and people floors below. And so it became a small little thing, but it was extremely manual, right? So you have to place the things on the cart. You have to wheel it around. You have to see if people are there when you're there. So there's a lot of improvements that obviously kind of a digital representation of the cart could deliver. And so that was kind of the leap, if you will, from, there's something here, to let me see if I can kind of put a business around this. And so that was kind of the first, I guess, birth problem statements of where Rheaply is trying to solve today.
So is this like a cart you took from the local shopping center that you kind of got past the security, or was this more of a pallet carry? No, I'm just kidding.
This is the cart that we used to carry mice around on, so it's pretty big.
Interesting.
Don't let my lab manager know about that, but yeah. So
got it. You didn't do unofficial reuse, I guess. That's good.
Exactly.
Well, so it sounds like that was the start, and then how did you go from there to deciding that this was worth a business then?
Yeah, so I did spend a couple years in kind of the corporate world, and so I started to make some contacts, and obviously just learning a little bit more about business models and how to start one. So I thought, the first thing is I need to figure out if this is a problem at Northwestern, if this is a problem at Fineberg, or if this is a systemic problem. And so one of the things that we did was conduct a survey. We could conduct a survey amongst, I think, about 150 users at Northwestern. And what we found was kind of startling. We found that the problem that I was having in my lab was not my lab's problem. It was a pervasive problem across the university. And one thing that Julie could probably speak to is that Northwestern, at least at the time, was ranked in the top quarter of green universities in the country. So I knew that if it was a problem at Northwestern, it's probably also a problem throughout all universities that do high impact research. And so that was kind of justification enough for me to take the leap and do something that I think could impact both the environment and research science.
Well, yeah, Julie, maybe you can speak to that. You're thinking about this from the perspective of sustainability, not necessarily from the perspective of, asset management, I assume, right? That's not really your role per se, but can you tell us how those things fit together from your perspective?
Yeah, I think what you hit on is how they fit together. There's a great intersection between sustainability and responsible use of resources. We have a goal to increase our diversion rate to 50% by 2020, and reducing waste and increasing our diversion through reuse or recycling is how we're going to get there. We could use a Garry on every floor of every lab building with a cart and face-to-face engagement around reuse opportunities. There may be even more Garys out there doing something similar, but as a sustainability initiative on campus, I never knew Garry was doing that. And we what we need is an institutional platform for this. Opportunities for surplus infrastructure are limited on our campus for sure. State institutions generally have a state mandate that implements a process and a program for managing surplus. I don't know that they always get down into the labs or that they're able to have a lot of success in the labs. But at Northwestern, we don't have a very robust infrastructure. Barring having a Garry and a cart on every floor of every lab building pushing around and hawking goods, we could really use something that institutionalizes and streamlines this process or makes it a little easier. A virtual platform is something that we identified. We did as part of our strategic sustainability plan. We did a very deep dive waste audit across campus, and we audited facilities based on their function. So lab buildings were part of that, and out of that waste audit came an integrated solid waste management plan, which is available on our website for anyone to see. And one of the things that was identified in there, a greatly seen need in as we sorted through the trash, was that things get thrown out that shouldn't. There's a great need to reclaim, and so that's a sustainability perspective, but also a better asset management goal. So we need a platform for surplus operations and for sharing and redistributing and repurposing items, on campus and within our own communities across Northwestern.
Well, yeah. What is the range of what you're actually seeing, Garry, now that you have this system up and running? I mean, it sounded like when you were wheeling your cart around the offices, it was mostly just surplus lab, like consumables, I assume, or maybe chemicals or other things like that. You weren't probably wheeling around electronic microscopes or things like that. But what do you see coming through your systems today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say it buckets a little differently for universities than it does for the industry. But from on the academic side, what we see is a lot of lab consumables. In fact, the way that we want to differentiate some of the stuff that we are doing at Rheaply versus some other kind of asset management systems is we really want to dig deep in the consumables, plastics, glassware, things that don't have a barcode or you wouldn't create a barcode for, but things that are obviously going to generate waste, but have a high value for redeployment. So I'll give you an example. If I take an antibody or parts of an antibody from a colleague, I've maybe just saved myself $300. They've also saved themselves from throwing something into biohazardous waste. And there's a cost to, obviously disposing of that waste. So it's a kind of at least a twofold kind of win. And so we see a lot of, again, things that you would find in a laboratory that are on the consumable side. But we have things like LED lamps, microscopes, surgical equipment, 3D printers. We have an array of other kind of heavier equipment from the laboratory as well.
So, Garry, tell us a little more about the actual platform itself. So what would it look like if I was, say, a researcher at Northwestern? When I logged into your system, what would I see?
So what we try to create is we're trying to take asset management or resource management and make it as easy as possible. So when you would log in, it would almost look like a cleaner version of an eBay or Amazon. So you would kind of have these very typical shopping use cases, right? So either you would search for something that you're looking for in particular, or maybe you pick a category that you want to just kind of shop around for things that might be available when you're not looking for something in particular. So from a UI UX perspective, it looks very much like a standard marketplace, but again, it's more like an internal inventory management tool. And then also the really cool thing that you can do on Rheaply is that you can book time. So let's say a person has a piece of capital equipment, but they are not using it effectively, or they're just underutilizing it because maybe the project that they bought it for has ended or has subsided. You can also allow people to like book an hour, book 3 hours or whatever, kind of like how you use like an open table to kind of book a restaurant. You can book time on someone's microscope. So you can also do those types of functionalities on Rheaply. But the look and feel of it on your phone, on your tablet, or on your computer is exactly how you would shop through like an eBay.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Let me play devil's advocate though for a second, and Julie, I'll direct this at you first, and then we'll let Garry answer this as well. It sounds great to get these labs to reuse the materials and equipment and whatnot, but aren't those same materials and equipment the critical tools they need to do their job? I mean, these are world-class researchers. Why do we need to bother them with worrying about the waste associated with their work? Or can you speak to that?
So I think in a university setting, I'm looking at it from more global across the institution. And while our researchers are particularly busy and focused and doing amazing things, the resources of the institution still come into play in that big picture. So if labs can use their resources, whether that's funding or supplies or goods, more effectively, it creates more opportunity down the road. So space is a premium, for instance, in labs, and especially on our campus where we're pretty tight. And so if you've got old equipment that you're not using or old supplies that you're not using taking up space, that's a waste, not just from a goods issue, but from a potential for laboratory research issue. So our labs at our Office of Research Safety have looked at cleaning out labs as a way to regain critical space to support greater research. So I think that's one way to look at it. And also, the labs are, whatever they're doing, they're functioning within this institutional setting, and the institution as a whole has priorities that the labs, are part of. And so if we have a priority to reduce waste or reduce cost, the labs are part of that, just like a department or any other academic division would be. So focusing on or understanding their role in the big picture of the institutional setting is still important, despite the fact that their work sometimes is separate from or very different from the rest of what's happening on campus, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Garry, so maybe a different pushback question for you, but I know we have mutual friend Allison Paradise, who I just saw at a conference yesterday, actually, or earlier this week, and she talks a lot about change management and just the challenges around change management. I mean, it sounds like a lot of what you're doing here is getting scientists to change their behavior. And one of the quotes I heard the other day, which gave me a chuckle, was, you can idiot-proof things, but PhD-proofing things is really difficult to do, or something like that. I think I mangled that one. But in any case, what kind of pushback are you getting from people trying to engage with this? What have you run into so far?
So some things that, I mean, they're very typical for asset management systems. Sometimes when people hear it's coming, they think, oh, we have to go label everything and re-inventory everything. And really, our platform is actually not meant to inventory everything. It's meant to inventory the things that are in surplus that have value, right? So the things that should not be thrown away, the things that people should understand that are available before they, go buy them again, before that person who owns it throws it away. So one thing is just kind of around the messaging around, we're not an asset management system. We call it an asset exchange manager. We try to help exchange assets that are valuable or resources that are valuable within an organization. The other thing that I would say around the kind of thought about change management at the individual or the user level is, indeed, when you're doing science, sometimes you don't think about, am I using a certain asset or resource very valuably, because you're high impact, right? You're trying to get your next paper out and your next thesis out if you're a PhD student, and so forth and so on. So one of the ways that we've tried to get at that is to incentivize the user themselves, right? So sometimes you can change behavior by saying, hey, user, or hey, student, if you do something that's going to benefit the university, going to benefit your colleague, and potentially benefit the planet, we want to do something for you, the user, not your lab, not the university, but you. And so we gamified our entire platform to kind of help give credit to the people who are doing things most uprightly, I would say. So those are some of the I would say kind of barriers that we continue to have to think about and cross. But the really cool thing is that I think at the top of the list of the people who should be at the forefront of the sustainability movement are scientists, right? So I think from the idea of it might being a change of behavior, but we've only received high marks about it being a welcome new change.
That's great. Speaking of the gamification, what kind of incentives do you offer? Is it pizzas or free antibodies, or what is it that you're giving away?
We've done. In fact, we're having a pizza party tomorrow. Actually, we throw a lot of parties. We talk about happy assets and happy resources. We're a happy company, so no, we throw a lot of parties. But no, typically the prizes, it does vary between organizations, so it depends on how we partner. But what we do standard is we typically send a $25 Starbucks gift card code. So let me step back. We run a continuous raffle. And if you win that raffle, because again, you've been a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more cost effective internally, we put you in this raffle. If you win, you get a $25 Starbucks gift card code emailed directly to you. And the really cool thing is that we're not managing it. The university or the institution that we're partnered with is not managing it. It's something that we've built out that just works. So what we also think about from a change management perspective is how do we design out many administrators and many functional people who have to spend time in making this work. So one of the ways we do is we try to virtualize a lot of the things that are on our platform, and the gamification is one.
Great. So so the Northwestern doesn't have to manage this directly. Is that the idea?
Nope.
Or any university or okay.
No university. Nope.
Julie, anything to add there?
Well, I will say, Gary, I love the scientists should be at the forefront for sustainability change. I may steal that and use it.
Please, I believe it, and I'm sure you do too as well.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think one point is that you were kind of touching on is that the lab setting is fairly isolated, and the lab workers tend to have a lot on their plate, and considering waste and things outside of their research is always a challenge to break through that. You mentioned behavior change, David. That's the story of my life, and one of the most challenging things to do is to engage people in behavior change. So anything you can do to incentivize them is really hopefully going to help shift the needle.
Yeah. Well, how have you done that, Julie? Other than, some of those types of, is it gamification, or what are the other techniques you've used for behavior change management in any context?
We don't necessarily have the resources for that gamification idea. So with us, it's about trying to engage folks in their setting and in what's important to them. We have a green office certification program, and that's a way for offices and individuals to really tailor sustainability to their specific group or setting. We would like to have on our radar to implement a green lab program or green lab certification program. And we haven't kicked that off just yet, but really helping people see their own behaviors and impact on the institution and where there's touch points for sustainability is the best way, I think, to engage folks. That if you just talk about sustainability on an institutional setting, it's all kind of, that's not me, I don't do that, I don't impact it. But really finding what people are doing, what they're already doing, and helping them see how that supports change at an institutional level is one way that we engage folks to see the impact and the potential they have to improve our sustainability efforts.
No, that's great. And I just got back from that conference and heard Allison Paradise give a panel on the Green Labs program that they run out of the My Green Lab, which was on our episode 4, I think. I was struck by, she framed it as individual changes may not make that big of a difference by themselves, but in aggregate, when you think of all of the laboratories over the country, the amount of waste, the amount of energy, the amount of, just individual changes, they do add up. And making that culture of change is really what they've been all about. So, okay, well, let's step back then. So let's try to frame what is the scale of what we're talking about. Like when we're talking about surplus, I'm sure waste is much bigger because you're not able to get rid of everything, right, Gary? People still have to throw away
That's right.
gloves and things like that. But what's the size of what we're talking about?
Yeah, so the data is still young on the front, because if you go to any CFO of a let's just again pick on academia, of a university, and ask them how much of their assets, whether that be equipment or supplies, a year do they think that they don't use effectively or don't use at all, they won't have any good data around that either. We tried. So what we did was we conducted a survey at Northwestern, and we just simply asked people in the actual lab spaces, how much of your budget do you think each year goes to wasted, meaning unused assets and resources? And we were able to get the number to be about 2.4%, which is really interesting because I think, generally speaking, the average lab has a supply budget of about $100,000 to $125,000 a year. So if you think about an aggregate, when you have thousands of labs at one university, the amount of money that's being generated to valuable surplus resources is significant. I know we've talked a little bit about the green win, which we are mission focused on, at least at Rheaply and also at Northwestern. But there's also kind of the green wins from a dollars perspective. We think it's around 2.4%, but as we get more universities onboarded and kind of look at the data, we'll be able to hone that number in a little bit better.
So that's 2.4% of supply budgets. That wouldn't include is that including equipment budgets?
Yep.
Like big refrigerators and microscopes and stuff like that
Yes,
as well? Or?
Yes. And what we haven't gotten down to, and maybe Julie will have a little bit more data of this, or at least high level thoughts about this, is some of those big pieces of equipment that pool electricity all day long aren't even being completely occupied, right? So if I start thinking about the amount of waste from an electricity bill perspective, the number probably exceeds what we've been able to calculate.
Great. Yeah. Julie, anything to add there, or any data you guys have collected out of your deep dive study?
Yeah. So in our waste audit, we saw that about 10% of the waste coming out of labs is lab plastics. And most of those are going to be those kind of small labwares. I don't have a data point on whether they were still reusable or not, but we did see a lot of things that were still in the packaging, still totally usable, that just got pitched because, probably because there wasn't an option for it, or there wasn't any awareness of, what else you could do with it. So, if you look at the potential to reduce waste from laboratories from an institutional perspective by, even 5%, labs make up a lot of waste. And so that can be pretty significant. Garry mentioned the energy use from lab equipment, and that is definitely a significant draw on the overall consumption in an institution. Things like refrigerators or freezers, deep freezers that are being not properly used, not fully used, are creating a significant amount of waste. So if you look at the scope, talking about equipment and equipment sharing and the sharing of a microscope, if labs were able to share freezers and or take things offline that they're not using or are old and inefficient, it would significantly impact the energy use on an institutional setting.
All right. No, this is encouraging, and it sounds like both of you are getting at, in your own ways to get at this problem. I suspect, though, that saving anything usually means disrupting a current business. Maybe, Garry, I'll throw this one at you first. This is a pretty major industry selling stuff to laboratories. I assume that people don't necessarily want people to reuse these things. In fact, I've worked in a former life when I was a software developer, I remember setting up a shopping cart for a company that was selling reusable plastics for doing some scientific research. And the owner of the company basically said, yeah, we're just printing gold. I mean, these things are they're pieces of plastic. We just make as many as we can and sell as many as we can and hope they have to use a new one every time. Who are you going to make mad? And are they going to even notice that you're a threat, or what do you think about that?
Well, firstly, I, on behalf of the whole scientific community, forgive you for your sins.
Thank you.
If I can speak on the behalf. So, yeah, I mean, if you're selling products or manufacturing products that happen to be on our platform, you don't like us. But that tension is always a tension between a primary vendor and a secondary marketplace, right? So, people who are selling shoes don't want them to be sold also on eBay. We're aware of that, but I think they'll curve around in the future to kind of what we're doing. So I'm I'm holding out for working with some of the big vendors. But one of the other things that we think about and face is there are a lot of different platforms for secondary equipment, in particular in the scientific space. Whether you're talking about corporate liquidators who are selling equipment from pharmaceutical biotechnology companies, or just kind of just like the eBay version of science, there are several different platforms. And actually, it can be confusing as a scientist who's trying to purchase, like which platforms are legitimate, which one should I go to, and so forth and so on. We enter a market that's kind of open from the supplies perspective, and a company that's more mission bound around cost savings and waste diversion. But for sure, there are definitely other organizations doing kind of secondary marketplaces for scientific equipment.
Yeah. So what's stopping labs then from, just going out to these other spaces? What is it different about what you guys are doing than them just going out to these things? It sounds like part of it is you're dealing with things beyond just the standard equipment that might end up in one of those marketplaces, but are there other things that differentiate Rheaply from what they're doing?
Yeah, great question. So the one major differentiator is we partner with the university. If your university is not a part of our client portfolio, someone at your university can't just post something on our platform. We try to establish a deep relationship with the institutions or organizations of which we're partnering. We align on their goals, we align on their expectations and parameters, and then we become a first touch point. So the idea would be, if I'm at a lab, where should I go post this, or where should I go look for something? Oh, I should go use that thing Rheaply that I see a lot of flyers around about, right? So we're a lot more visible than some kind of random secondary marketplace for equipment. That's one big thing. The second is you see your colleagues on the platform. You have a profile page. People know what kind of science you're doing. We send around newsletters around sustainability. We send around newsletters when people in your university have published a new paper. So it's a little bit more social, and it's a little bit more closer to you from I know these people on this platform, as opposed to I'm buying something from someone in China. So those are one or two of the biggest differences, but there, of course, are others.
Got it. And, as we've been talking about this, we've used the term asset management, but I think we've also used the term like supply or surplus management. Mm-hmm. It sounds like this is really more about surplus than it is asset management. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So there are, I think, I sometimes say that asset management systems are commoditized. You can find one. If you just Google it, you'll have a million entries to kind of find one. But there aren't great systems to manage surplus supplies. So if you think about a box that comes into a company and organization, it might be tagged and it might be tracked and listed on an asset management system. But when you open the box and take the supplies out and distribute the supplies, now if I don't use all the supplies, there's nothing tracking that I still have a little bit of the supply left. And so what we're trying to do is kind of fill that gap, but not use the asset management tracking way, to use the principles of like secondary marketplaces to connect people who have these little bits of things that they can share with others before throwing them away or before they buy it.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So I think we were joking about this in our prep call, but I have a pile of records in my office, and the WAM record in my pile of records is not tracked on my insurance asset list anywhere.
Exactly.
But yeah, so but it was part of the asset tracking system of the record company back in 1986 or whenever I bought the thing, right? So okay, well, what else? I know we've talked a little bit about some of the pushback and some of the challenges, but it sounds like there's issues around what you can do with things that you buy in a scientific setting. So if you're a scientist, you buy this equipment, you may not be able to sell it, or you might have to sell it. So Garry, can you speak to some of those challenges that you run into with this type of thing?
Yeah. So there are federal and state obligations, and some of those state obligations, of course, are different for each state that you go to. But generally speaking, states adopt the federal guidelines. The federal guidelines are both clear and non-exhaustive. So the clear part is that if you have an item that's worth $5,000 or less at a retail value, the government says that the PI, or the principal investigator, has plenary authority to move it around however they best see fit, whether that's to another lab in the university, throw it away, or to another lab outside the university. Once the item gets above $5,000, especially to $25,000, generally speaking, the federal guidelines to make the university have to be in a party to that type of decision. And then once it's over $25,000, the federal government itself has to be party to this to the decision. So that's kind of generally speaking how the kind of rules, but really there aren't a lot of rules, quite frankly. The government wants people to share, wants people to collaborate for obvious reasons. And so the cool thing is we've built Rheaply around those federal guidelines and parameters. So even if you unwittingly post something of $10,000, we take care to make sure that you don't get into any federal trouble.
Got it. Yeah, Julie, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Gary's outline of the federal guidelines demonstrates that those are pretty, specific, and even if they're sometimes vague, there's a lot there. And so I think in a lab setting, they're focused on those guidelines. So institutional guidelines, or me trying to jump in and say, hey, you should post those pipettes you're not going to use on, this Rheaply site, like that. That's a challenge to get them beyond these very strict, federal rules. So I think getting the attention of a lab, or anyone on campus really, but the attention of a lab is can be even more challenging. I mentioned before that labs are often just very isolated and focused on their own work. So this kind of platform, when we can institutionalize it, make it even though the university doesn't have to manage it or run it, but make it a university program, I think that really helps get across some of those barriers of reaching, engaging, and getting labs to retain the message and the idea that you're sharing in light of all the other, stringent guidelines that they're trying to follow when it comes to surplus or assets.
Yeah, so that sounds good. Using this platform to try to get people beyond some of those barriers and just getting people to pay attention sounds great. But Julie, now that you've worked in this space, I know Gary's done a little bit more, worked with more institutions, but from your perspective, what other advice would you give institutions thinking about putting a program together like this?
So I think kind of pulling a few things together is a platform such as Rheaply has the potential to do this. We talked before about engaging people in understanding why these efforts are important and how their individual impact matters and adds up across the board. So I think as you look at any kind of surplus management, engaging labs around these, figuring out your message and tailoring it in a way that helps users understand and embrace the value of this behavior change that you're engaging them in is important. Understanding how you're going to engage people in using the platform. I don't think Gary would disagree. That's one of our challenges in this pilot project at Northwestern. How do we make sure people are aware of this and using it and coming to it? And I also think one thing that's important that I don't think we really touched on is the metrics. What are you measuring and tracking through using something like this, whether it's Rheaply or your own surplus operation, and are the things that you can track things that support institutional priorities and or that provide useful information on the success of that effort or efforts that you are looking at university wide. So I'd say those are things to think about as you move forward with any project like this.
We didn't really get into the pilot project. Can you just give us a brief overview of what that is and what I think you've spoken to some of the learnings you've had out of it in the last statement, but just tell us a little more about the pilot.
So, yeah, I think Gary can talk a little bit more about the outcomes, but I'm thrilled that the Fineberg School of Medicine stepped up to pilot this effort. With so much lab-centered work in the School of Medicine, it's a great place to figure out what works, where the obstacles are, and how we're going to overcome them. I think we have a lot of challenges still to figure out, and how we're going to really get people to use this in a robust way and really make it work. Obviously, the more people use it, the better it is and the greater a resource it is. So my hope is that Rheaply's efforts will, one, increase awareness, engagement around waste and opportunities for reuse in labs, and two, demonstrate to the institution that this is feasible and can work and can be a benefit to the institution as a whole, as well as the labs and the users themselves.
Gary, why don't you give us an overview from your perspective?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we have internal KPIs that we try to track and kind of make sure that a university is getting a lot of value out of both our technology and the program that we're trying to virtually install, as well as they just like working with us. You can't undercut kind of the customer success or service of that. Beyond that, we like to see real numbers, right? So we like to think of things in three buckets. Are we helping a university divert waste? How much? Are we helping a university save money? How much? And are we helping to draw a university closer together, or so-called collaborate? So we kind of have metrics that we track, but we, as Julie was kind of pointing out, we want to align our platform and in this case, our pilot success with what priorities the university itself wants to see. That ranges from the different universities that we've partnered with, that ranges from what they want to see. But internally, we try to look at those three metrics as kind of what we think are valuable.
Okay, great. I've got a couple more questions for you. This one, give this one to Garry. You've been on this journey of trying to build a platform, and as an entrepreneur, I know how challenging that can be. And getting people to pay attention to something that you've put your heart and soul into figuring out.
Yes.
But along the way, where have you had aha moments, or maybe the inverse, the moments?
Yeah. So I'll start with the last one first of the question. So where we had the O moments. So what I will say is, it is not easy understanding how to move resources around a university. It's even harder to figure out how to move resources between universities. We had to spend a lot of legal money, a lot of time and patience, because a lot of this stuff is just not written down anywhere, and trying to figure out structures that protect us as a business, but also protect our clients as institutions. So that's a bit of work that I didn't imagine going into this venture that we had to put together, and we're still, quite frankly, learning. The aha moment is every scientist I've spoken with, and it's been 2.5 years that we have the business. I've spoken to scientists in London and Canada and Mexico and every corner of the United States. I think I've been to over 70 different universities and spoken about Rheaply. One of the things I think 100% of the time I hear is, why did I think of this? Right. And just in some like base level of, there's something here, we should keep working and keep striving, is the fact that resoundingly people who have been in a lab understand exactly what we're doing, and they get it, and they want it to work. So that's what keeps us going, even though there are sometimes legal or regulatory challenges that we have to understand or help the government write itself, which we actually are. We are motivated and inspired by the kind of collective voice that we've heard from the scientific community that something like this should exist. And we're glad that someone's trying to take it on.
Great. Julie, question for you along the same lines would be, and maybe I'll ask this one to Garry as well, would be, let's say that these efforts are wildly successful. Can you paint a picture for us of what this looks like, say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? How do labs operate differently than they do today?
Oh, wow. So I would love to see that in the future, labs are just a little bit more in touch with the inventory they have, the waste they're generating. And instead of, oh, we need to make space, we have a new researcher coming in, let's just wipe that entire stock of stuff that's stored over there on the lab bench into the trash bin and move on, to have them engage and be aware of what they have on a regular basis, and using a system, some system for surplus on an ongoing, as opposed to oh no, we have to make space, we have to get rid of this stuff right now. Just doing it on a more timely fashion and being aware on a daily basis. That's what I would hope to see in the future. Lab users, lab managers, PIs, instead of having a closet full of old junk that nobody knows what's in there, they're more up to date and up to speed on what they have, what they need, whether something they've outgrown something, or moved beyond a particular supply item, and be more aware of the idea of sharing resources. I think scientists are, talk about collaboration when it comes to research itself, but to have them talk about collaboration when it comes to the tools to support research would be a huge win, and an improvement in awareness and understanding of their role in the bigger institutional setting.
Yeah, so they can look at this bottle of alcohol and say, "Does this bring me joy?" and then decide what to do with it. Yeah.
No, KonMari.
No, that's a great answer.
Well,
I'm sorry.
It would bring me joy if they did what I described.
Will this bring Julie
So
joy? Yes.
I wouldn't have to throw them out.
That's great. Gary, what about you? Where do you see this going in a longer? You're wildly successful. I mean, other than you sell the company and could move to Tahiti or something, I suppose, is probably in that mix too. But what else do you see as the outcome
no
of this?
selling of the company? I'll be in Chicago, even if it's wildly successful. No, so our vision is pretty clear. We want to enable not just in academic labs, but also in K through 12 settings, also in corporate America. We want people who want to be sustainable, who want to help their organization purchase smarter, be able to do so, right? So we want to empower. In fact, our mission statement is empowering professionals to save money and save the environment. We hope that our tool is a place that people can come and say, do we already have this, and get an answer? Or does someone need it, and get an answer? That's how I would measure our success 5 years from now. And we are dogged about trying to get there.
Fair enough. All right. Well, as we're wrapping up, it's been fun hearing about all the innovation you guys have been working through. And I'm doing this podcast. It's been really fun for me just to, stick my head into all these crazy corners of sustainability. I mean, this is not one I really had ever really thought about. So it's been fun for me to learn about it. Julie, it's been fun to see how your university is taking this on as a test and experimenting with it and working with a startup company. That's great. And Gary, it's really fun to hear of somebody going after an entrepreneurial venture like this. I like hearing people trying to make a living at saving the world, which I certainly am in that camp as well. But any final thoughts either of you would like to leave us with today? Maybe Julie, I'll start with you as we wrap this up.
I think my one thought, and this is kind of a win that I've seen in working with Gary, is that any idea or new program, new project, if you can start the conversation around how that thing, that project, that program fits within the bigger institutional goals, particularly your sustainability goals, and if you can find partners who are willing to talk through how that fits. I think you've heard Gary say a few times, wanting to meet goals within the institution. And my first conversation with him, it was a lot of fun talking about, here's the metrics that I look at from a sustainability standpoint and a waste standpoint. Here's the metrics they look at from their standpoint, and how do we merge those two, and how do we integrate so that we really can see how this effort supports the institution. I think that's what's exciting to me about a new program like this is working together with an outside vendor and coming up with ways that it's good for all of us and it fits seamlessly into the institutional goals.
Great. No, I'll take that to heart as well. That's great advice. Gary, what do you have for us as final thoughts here?
Final thoughts. I think that if you have an idea that's big and bold and not really being addressed, you should do it, but you can't do it alone. You have to establish a team that is way smarter than you and everything, but then you also have to find the right partners in the market, whether they, in this case, be at an institution, the right administrators who care, who want things to be different. And so what we've been lucky to run into with Northwestern and all of our university partners are people who want the world to be a little bit different, at least the world that they operate in, and they are willing to figure it out with us. And so that's been really, really powerful to work with. And I imagine over the next year we'll be making a lot of success happen with the places that we're operating in.
Well, great. I really appreciate both of your time today. I know it's a very, very chilly day in Chicago. Hopefully you're warm and cozy in your house. And thanks for sharing all these thoughts with us today and coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for this episode. To learn more, you can always see the show notes at our website at campusenergypodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter. We are @EnergyPodcast. This show is a free service, but if you'd like to support the show, please consider leaving a rating or review on iTunes, or just telling a friend about the show. As always, thanks for listening.